This is the IBJ podcast for the week of May 19th, 2025, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. You may have become so used to them that you no longer notice, but snaking through downtown Indianapolis's northwest quadrant are the remains of a revolutionary public transit system that transported riders on elevated tracks 30 feet high. It was called the People Mover, developed for $44 million by Clarian Health Partners, the hospital system now known as Indiana University Health. From its launch in 2003 to 2019, it recorded roughly 6 million rider trips on a 1.4-mile track running between Methodist Hospital, University Hospital, and Riley Hospital for Children. Over those 16 years, stops were added at the IU Health Pathology Laboratory and at IU Health's Fairbanks Hall. The People Mover had the cooperation of city officials who allowed the track to use public right-of-way along Senate Avenue, West 11th Street, and University Boulevard. And the People Mover was filled with promise. As some predicted, it could be expanded to a larger public transit system that could include Indianapolis International Airport. But the tram came to a screeching halt in 2019 when IU Health said it would begin offering shuttle buses instead and expected to save about $40 million over 10 years. That also was about the time IU Health began planning a major facility consolidation and modernization project downtown. IBJ reporter Daniel Lee has a personal connection to the People Mover and recently began looking into what remains of the twin-track system and whether IU Health has any plans to resurrect it. He also gauges support for a proposal that would transform the raised infrastructure into something called the Indiana Black Heritage Trail. He's our guest this week, and here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Daniel Lee, who covers healthcare for IBJ. Thanks for making time this week to discuss your story.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Mason.
So this is exciting. Our cubicles happen to be next to each other in the newsroom, so we've been talking about the story for about a month. Tell the folks, what has been your interest in the People Mover?
I've been in journalism a long time, but I've done some other things. In full disclosure, I was actually an employee of IU Health for a fairly short period of time in 2010 and 2011, which was during when the People Mover was in service. And so I was based in Fairbanks Hall at the end of the canal, and so rode the People Mover, if not every day, most days.
Okay. What was it like to ride the People Mover?
I actually found it greatly convenient because it dropped you off right in the heart of the buildings you were going to. And even before I worked at IU Health, I think like a lot of people who were around downtown, it was visually an interesting thing to look at. An elevated train, I think a lot of people thought it was quite interesting looking, whether they thought it made the place look a bit more cosmopolitan or reminded them of the Disney monorail or whatever it might be. I remember at times, too, it would be pretty crowded, particularly at the IU station by Riley and University Hospital. A lot of people getting on. And I don't think I ever had to stand like in the subway or anything, but yeah, it was definitely well used.
So for folks who don't spend a lot of time downtown or who just missed it in its heyday, explain what was the People Mover during its years of operation.
Yes, so it came after the creation of IU Health, what was for years called Clarian Health Partners, which was actually like the merger of IU Hospital, Raleigh Hospital for Children, and Methodist Hospital. And while the University Hospital and Raleigh are on the greater IU, formerly IUPUI med school campus, Methodist was about 1.5 miles away. And this was an effort to connect them with all the physicians going back and forth, as well as maybe some patients and certainly other employees. And really, I guess, create a greater medical school campus. And so that was some years couple years in the creation of the People Mover. And it launched in June 2003. And sometime after it launched, they added a third station where I worked at Fairbanks Hall, right where I-65 comes through. And at the head of the canal, there's Fairbanks Hall, which is an administrative building for both the medical school and for IU Health. And then the large IU Pathology Lab, which is actually, I think, where the station was attached to on 10th and 11th Street there.
So it was about 1.4 miles long from
Correct.
Start to finish or finish to start.
Correct.
Depending which way you're headed.
Yeah.
And 30 foot high. I mean, it was elevated 30 feet off of the street.
Yeah, which really, one of the reasons I enjoyed riding it is, I don't know, it was just a nice break from the day, like, because you had interesting views being up that high. And I, as a fan of history, I just remember going by like Crispus Attucks and thinking about the history or thinking about Oscar Robertson. And yeah, so it was an interesting ride.
So you mentioned the Disney monorail. So I've always thought about the People Mover as a monorail, just because I think that's our sort of modern way of saying elevated train that travels a short distance and drops people off somewhere. But it technically was not a monorail. What specifically was it?
Monorail, because it did not have like one rail it ran on. It ran on kind of concrete tracks with like rubber wheels, I believe. And the actual term is like an automated people mover. Mm-hmm. And there's some of these that have been built at like a big casino resort in Nevada or a big resort in Hawaii. Well, it's interesting because in looking through the various sources for this story, everything from the general contractor to media reports, the speeds varied. I think it usually ran around 20 miles an hour, a little bit slower on the turns. And then it had max speeds of closer to like 28 miles an hour listed for the system. So pretty efficient to go that short of a distance, particularly, like I said, when it drops you off in a station right in the building.
So certainly this was an unusual thing to see in downtown Indianapolis, which though in the 1800s was a major rail city, but that of course fell off with the advent of the automobile and the interstate system. What was unusual about the People Mover when it was planned and built?
One of the really unique things about it was that it traveled over public right-of-way. And so there was a franchise agreement signed with the city of Indianapolis to allow for that. And in return, residents could ride the People Mover for free. It was always a free shuttle. And so you could go into the hospital and ride it for fun if you wanted to. And I suppose some people did, but that was a stipulation for going over the right of way. And I think just the relationship that Clarian and IU Health had with the local community.
So it was developed specifically by what we called Clarian at the time.
Correct.
So the city didn't have any ownership interest. The city didn't.
No, it was an IU Health property.
But the city allowed them to use that right-of-way, the public right-of-way, elevated right-of-way.
Yes.
If it were. And I think in your story, you said that in April 2000, it was the only privately funded system in the nation built over public roads.
Yes, that's what I read in multiple places in reporting the story, is after they signed that agreement, I think that you're referring to, yes, that system became unique in that way.
So Clarian became IU Health. IU Health currently owns the People Mover. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And there's 3 stations. There's the one I mentioned, like University Hospital right by Riley Hospital. And then there's the middle station, which is at the canal with Fairbanks Hall and the pathology lab. And then there's the other end of the line is at Methodist Hospital, which is the Methodist Hospital that is going to be replaced by the new construction project nearby.
And when it was launched in 2003, my impression was that local officials and Clarion executives already were hyping its potential to be more than just a way to travel between these healthcare centers. What did they envision for the People Mover?
Well, there was a lot of talk, I think, about, the uniqueness of the project, and I think enthusiasm for rethinking transportation, different modes of transportation, which I think is a great, healthy thing for a city to talk about. And there was an article in the IBJ in April of 2003, so a few months before, and there were possibilities mentioned about linking up nearby sites in the city like downtown with the People Mover eventually, some support or potential support, I guess, from other partners in the area to study it, and even mentioned a possible link to the airport.
And did it do that?
No, certainly not.
You can't get to the airport that way.
I will say, though, it ran for more than 15 years. While it didn't expand, it certainly ran very regularly. I mean, the contractor told me that it ran at high 90s, 98% or more availability, and had more than 6 million trips not 6 million trips, it carried more than 6 million passengers.
Right. So you might have been counted multiple times.
Exactly.
Okay. And so if I'm using it, well, you were using it, I mean, to get to different parts of this downtown healthcare hub for pieces that you're working on for
work, yeah.
Yeah, but who else would be using it?
Certainly a lot of doctors. I mean, it's a giant academic medical system and it's a teaching hospital. And so physicians may have meetings or see patients, certainly nurses, administrators, other hospital staff. I think occasionally you'd have patients on there as well, and others, maybe someone parks somewhere different or has an appointment at a different hospital. There's certainly a lot of cooperation between those IU Health facilities.
Was it convenience or also for safety? I mean, that's a pretty hairy part of town road-wise.
Well, I don't remember reading a lot about safety. I think it was more for convenience and kind of creating more of a unified campus, yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm, with more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with the latest episode of the IBJ Podcast. Let's return to my conversation with Daniel Lee about the fate of IU Health's People Mover. And then in 2019, correct, it was mothballed.
Correct. So in December of 2018, there were news stories and IU Health said it was going to suspend the People Mover because of it needing upcoming costs, maintenance-wise, and ongoing operational costs were the reasons given. And talking with the general contractor who put it together, he remembered at the time, too, that IU Health was also already talking about the major construction project, which is now going on and which would consolidate University Hospital and Methodist Hospital in the same site. And so the campus, the fundamentals of kind of the IU Health campus would be changing in the coming years.
So even back then that they were anticipating that
it seemed to be, yeah.
Yeah, that the campus could become more centralized.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but they mentioned also operational costs. How much did it cost to run?
The best I could tell is the estimates given by the general contractor did a lengthy report on the People Mover soon after it came out, and they were saying about $1 million a year. And there was a news release from IU around when it was suspended that cited up to like $3 million a year. So something in that ballpark. And the system cost about $44 million initially.
When it was built?
Yeah.
So when it initially was running, the figure was about $1 million, but it potentially could have risen to $3 million a year.
Yes, it was over, I guess, over the years, and maybe it was more expensive. Yeah.
And there were some circumstances under which it wouldn't run.
Yes. One of the news stories said it wouldn't run in really windy conditions or storms, very inclement weather. And I do remember that from when I was there. There were certain times it was not running.
So what happened to the people who needed to be moved?
Well, IU Health immediately started a shuttle bus service, which still runs between its campuses, and that runs for free as well. I think what drew me to this story was just whenever I was in that part of town, just seeing the tracks and realizing, and I think when I started working here, I was curious, and I remember looking in our archives and seeing when it was suspended exactly and thinking like, wow, that was like 6 years ago and really not much has been said. And so it's one thing to stop like a service. It's another thing when you have like this giant infrastructure that remains. And so I just decided it would be worth an update.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When you drive through what we now call, that's what's so complicated about this story, is that the area of downtown has changed quite a bit. What we now call the IU Indy campus, formerly IUPUI. I mean, you don't even recognize it anymore. They just look like they're just giant pylons in the street for some reason, but that's the people mover.
Right. That's the people mover. And there's actually like pneumatic tubes in it that are used to transport medical things, which IU Health said that is still in operation.
Right. That was another use, for that line.
Yeah.
So they would, what would they put in the pneumatic tubes?
I believe it was like lab material and such.
Okay.
Like at old newspapers, they'd have pneumatic tubes to send documents and things around.
Yeah.
But you can transport things that way.
And they still use those.
See, the IU Health, they responded to the story via email, and they said those are still in use.
Now, as you mentioned, IU Health now has its hands full with, I think, the largest construction project in the state of Indiana, a $4.3 billion downtown campus. Real quick, go through that again. What is it that they are attempting to do?
It's really a modernization, and it's a replacement for the existing Methodist Hospital. And like I mentioned, it consolidates the University Hospital. And a new Methodist had been talked about for many, many years. And it's just IU Health looking to provide the latest, most modern facility for their patients.
Has the construction project impacted the people mover infrastructure?
Yes, they did. In 2023, there were sections of the people mover track along Senate removed to allow for construction vehicles. Yes, and so the people mover is now no longer a complete track like it was.
Okay.
Yes. And IU Health said they had no immediate plans to restart the people mover, but I do think with these different things, it would be a fairly complicated endeavor if they wanted to.
Mm.
And initially the contractor gave a lifespan, an estimated lifespan of the system without a major overhaul of like 30 years. And so they would still be within that. But that's, again, another reason I wanted to do the story is just that I hadn't really seen much in the public sphere about the people mover in recent years and thought it was time for an update.
Yeah, it just exists.
Yeah.
It's just there.
I mean, I said it's faded into oblivion.
Yeah, while still being 30 feet above our head. Does anybody in city leadership have a say in what happens, or at least an opinion about what should happen?
I received an emailed statement from Vop Osley, the city county council president, and he was just very supportive of IU Health and its decision-making and its partnership in the city. And so he voiced a lot of support and confidence in the way things were being handled or would be handled with the decision-making.
All right. Is there anyone saying we need to do something about this right now?
Well, that was when I started doing some initial research, I came across an op-ed, Scott Keller, who was a former city county council member, who in 2021 wrote a guest column in the IBJ suggesting that the elevated tracks be turned into a Black Heritage Trail because some of that area was home to some historic Black neighborhoods in Indianapolis's history. And he proposed putting together some funding or an initiative to make it a trail.
That would be really great.
Well,
elevated trails is something, not necessarily at the site, but a lot of people have suggested that for various parts of downtown, usually having to do with train tracks.
Yes, and certainly the whole idea of rails to trails and for bike paths, pedestrian paths. And I think one thing that is attractive about it is just like riding on the people mover gave you that kind of perspective of being up high. It'd be interesting getting above those streets by 30 feet it gives you an interesting perspective on the city.
Okay. Is there any support for Keller's idea that you've heard so far?
Well, for this story, I called and talked with Eunice Trotter at Indiana Landmarks. And she really liked that idea and talked more about just the history in that area and how that could be a potential appropriate use. And IU Health in their statements to me said multiple times that they are having communications, are engaged and with the community.
Okay. And IU Health has the ultimate say.
Yes.
It's up to them to see what happens.
Yes.
Okay. And as you said, it doesn't seem like it's anywhere close to the front burner for them right now, especially with a $4.3 billion construction project underway.
I mean, they certainly are running a giant hospital system and have this giant construction project. But yeah, we'll see what might happen with this. And it will be interesting to see if it remains where it is or if something else happens with the people mover, if there's some final decision made sometime soon.
Well, thanks a lot, Dan. I appreciate your reporting.
Thanks. It's great to be back on.
My thanks again to Daniel Lee. You can read more about the People Mover and Dan's story in the latest issue of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other stories in this week's IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, IndyCar drivers love to be on the track, but securing a deep bench of sponsors is also a full-time job that's just as important as climbing the podium. IBJ's Mickey Shuey digs into the business of attracting corporate support. Also in this week's issue, Kate Sharon explains how Governor Mike Braun's scrutiny of Elevate Ventures raises questions about the future of a planned $100 million investment fund to be managed by Elevate and intended to help young companies scale up their businesses. And Daniel Bradley explores how the explosion in popularity for the WNBA could lead to significantly higher player salaries. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. Yeah, it is quite a bit easier to access all of the latest local business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. And we're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.
Get ready for full throttle coverage as we shift into high gear for Business at the Brickyard, presented by LiUNA with support from the City of Westfield and Daniel's Family Vineyard and Winery. We're giving you the inside track on the powerful connection between motorsports and the Indiana economy. Join us at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes access, and the stories that drive the business of motorsports. So buckle up and join us for Emmy Award-winning Business at the Brickyard coverage all month long.